Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jake, and I'm recording live from my home studio here. I'm calling in today and recording this on behalf of Formlabs as part of their Formlabs Comes to You series, in which we talk to a bunch of different industry experts about how they're working from home amid the COVID outbreak, how everyone's doing their part to make sure that people stay healthy and happy and are able to be productive at home. And what I'd like to do here today is talk to you a little bit about ZBrush, the premier sculpting software by Pixologic, which is a great tool for you to be able to sculpt and model things with high detail, high surface finish, anything that is organic that would otherwise be difficult to sculpt in things like Fusion 360 by Autodesk, SolidWorks, Onshape, or even Rhino. Well, those softwares are great for making mechanical objects, objects of a specific size and functionality. ZBrush is a great tool for doing anything organic, highly detailed, anatomical, and even medical and jewelry applications for ZBrush. I myself am a toy designer. When I'm not working at Formlabs doing video trainings for customers like yourselves, what I'm doing is working at home on toy design. So what I'd like to do here today is take you through ZBrush, show you how I use it, how they've developed some great tools over the years to make 3D printing easier and more accessible than ever, and then show you some projects I've been working on and how I go from using the tools in ZBrush to exporting via their 3D print hub into our PreForm print preparation software. I'll show you a little bit of PreForm there at the end so you can see how to set up something for print. And then as a follow-up to this live stream in a couple of weeks, I'll do a live stream about how I go about finishing my parts and painting them. So if you want to learn a little bit about post-processing techniques, painting and finishing of your items to get a nice factory new finish for photography and for prototypes, I'll be happy to show you that as well. I'll be live here in the chat too, so from time to time I'll take a break and see if anyone has any questions. So feel free to type in the Twitch chat, and this will be recorded and backed up on the Formlabs YouTube page if you'd like to refer back to it in the future. You can always find me at stuffbyjk on Instagram or by going to stuffbyjk.com if you'd like to reach out about any projects you like to work on or just ask me any questions you may have about ZBrush or printing. I'm happy to answer those. All right, so we'll get started. We'll see if anyone's here in the chat. Hey, Cassie, thanks for joining us. All right, so once again, my name's Jake, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about ZBrush. What you see on the screen right now is the ZBrush interface loaded up. This is not the traditional interface in ZBrush, and one thing I'd like to address right off the bat is that when people think about ZBrush and starting with it, they often open up the software, see all of these menus, and get scared, saying, wow, this looks really complicated. I don't know if I have the time to learn this thing. I'm going to go back to whatever I was doing before. And typically, what you were doing before was not 3D modeling, or at least not modeling the way that you want to. What Formlabs enables you to do is to customize this interface to make it look however you want it to look, to put whatever tools you want to have access to at your fingertips. And what I've done here is customize my interface to my liking so that I've got my brushes along the bottom of the screen. So you can see those here. These are the brushes that I use all the time. So if I'm using a mouse and keyboard as I'm doing now, or if I'm using a Wacom tablet or any sort of pen input device, I can quickly access the tools that I'd like to access without needing to go into menus. Additionally, in customizing my interface, I can go into menus and grab out functions that I often use and place those in the frame around the screen. So if I want to, I could strip all of these tools away. If I only want to work with one brush, I could come here and just have a nice clean interface with nothing in it. All of the tools are still accessible from the top menu navigation, but what I like to do is to have my custom interface so that I have what I need. If you go to the preferences menu, you can always load in or save your custom user interface. That's what I'll do here and show you the tools that I've got. So let's get on to some fun stuff. In ZBrush right now, what I've been working on lately while working from home is when I'm not playing the game, I am modeling this character from Nintendo's Animal Crossing. Animal Crossing is a beloved franchise if you don't know, and it's a great way to kind of live vicariously through your digital avatar and live on a tropical island. While many of us would like to travel right now, we're all stuck at home. And so one of the characters I've really latched onto is this character called Orville, who works for Dodo Airlines on every island. Orville is the gate attendant for the airport, and you talk to him every day if you'd like to visit your friends and hop on a charter seaplane to go to a different island. I feel like I have some kinship with Orville because he is trying his best with the tools he has, and he is a customer service representative. He's got a headset just like me, and he is often working overtime to make sure that his customers get where they need to get to. And so what I'm doing here is sculpting Orville in the style of an amiibo figure. Nintendo makes this great series of small figurines called Amiibo, and they have made a line of these figures for Animal Crossing for one of the previous games. Here you can see one of my other favorites, Blathers, the owl who runs the museum. But they haven't yet made any characters from the new game. So what I'd like to do is to model this character, prepare him for print on the Formlabs printer, and then eventually release these files for free. After this video goes live on YouTube, there will be links in the description so that you can download the files that I've made here and print your own Orville figure, and I'll be updating my website with the other characters as I make them. If we have time at the end of the stream, I'll also start modeling the character Daisy May, who I love. Daisy is a resident of the island who sells turnips every week, and if you play the game, you know that turnips are there to make you a lot of bells. So Daisy is a pretty wonderful character. So what I like to show here is what I use in ZBrush to make these characters happen. One cool thing about ZBrush is if your computer goes to sleep, you get this nice screensaver here that will cycle through artwork that members of the ZBrush community have made, and that's what's going on now. All right, so here's Orville, and I've been sculpting Orville on my side. I'm going to show you a couple of the different brushes that I use to make Orville happen. I'm going to then sculpt a component for the character in order to get him ready for 3D print, and then I'll show you the tools that I use to export him. Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and every 10 minutes or so, I'll look down to see if anyone has anything, and I'll address those questions as we go. All right, so ZBrush once again enables you to make organic figures, and as you see here, I've made Orville. He's a great character to get started with if you want to model something like this, because at the end of the day, he's made up of primitive geometry. When I wanted to sculpt his head, I just imported a sphere to my scene, and I started pushing and pulling it. I'll show you what that looks like now. So if I go over to my subtool menu here, this is where all of my tools live, and you'll see that all of the various components are there on the right side of the screen. What I'll do is click append, and I will append a sphere. And I can just scale this to size really quickly here, make a smaller sphere, and then I can start pushing and pulling this sphere to start making it look a little like the character. All right. What you see on the left side of the screen is a great feature that ZBrush has called Spotlight. And what Spotlight allows you to do is to bring in photo reference so that you can have all of your reference on the screen. As with any art medium, it always helps to use reference instead of trying to conjure something from your mind directly. As imaginative as you may be, you're not always going to be able to hit the target that you'd like to hit. As I can attest with this character, I sculpted him from memory to begin with, thought it looked pretty good, and then when I played the game, I was shocked by how off base I was. So I started importing some reference here, and that's what you see on the left side of the screen. So I've got my sphere here now, and what I can start doing is use this move topological tool. So I'm going to change the size of my brush, and I know that his head is a little bit oblong, so I'll just pull the sphere here to kind of add some form, and I know that the front of his head here, this beak needs to come out as a protrusion. I could pull out some material like this, but you see the geometry that makes this up starts to get really stretched out if you do that. So one of the cool features in ZBrush is this beautiful tool that they have called Dynamesh. What Dynamesh allows you to do is to retopologize, or to change the geometry that makes up the object, and to give you infinite resolution effectively. So if I go to Dynamesh here, crank up this value and hit polish, when I hit Dynamesh, what I'll get is new geometry. So no matter what I want to do, I basically always have infinite clay. So I can keep pulling this and move this around, and I'm not going to run out of resolution. And then I can always re-Dynamesh if I want to have a little bit more fidelity on this character here. I'm going to undo here for a second before I start making all these wild movements, and I will go back and let's make his beak here. So I've got my sphere, and I know that his beak is right in the middle of his head. So what I'll do, I'll hit solo here. You can work in symmetry in ZBrush, another great feature. So no matter what you do on one side, it is translated to the other side. And the other tool I really enjoy is called masking. So what you can see here is wherever I'm drawing this box, it's going to mask an area. And so when I start modeling, everywhere except for that area is going to be changed. And you can use this to your benefit for things like this beak. So what I'll do is I'll change my masking tool here to a circular shape, and I'll come here to the center of my screen and I'll say, okay, his little dodo bill is going to be about there. And I'm going to mask the backside of this object. And now I can come to my move tool and I can just stretch this out here, flatten it down, move this around, and get a nice beak protrusion. I'll go ahead and re-Dynamesh so that I've got a little bit more geometry here. I can crank up the resolution too to make that a little bit more smooth. Let's re-Dynamesh here. Okay, so now I've got a great start to this character. And I can start moving things around, pushing and pulling. Now again, I'm not going to model this to completion because I've already got Orville where I want him. But what I can do here is grab my next favorite tool, which is Damn Standard, made by a great artist named Damien, who's been a great member of the ZBrush community for a long, long time. Damien works at Blur Studios and is a wonderful resource if you want to learn how to use the software. So if I hit the B key for brush, I bring up all of the brushes I have installed. And then one of the great tools in ZBrush is this quick search feature. So if I hit D for Damien and S for standard, it takes me right to the brush I'm looking for. And what this allows you to do is to make a nice crisp line. You can go in there. If you hold the Option key, you get the inverse function. So if I want to outline the beak here, I hold the Option key and go just like that. And I'm starting to define this bill. And there we go. If I was sculpting a little lizard character or an alligator, I might have what I want here. If I make a mask here, I can make something like a nostril. And let's go ahead and align my movement tool and push this in. So I've got a start of a nostril there, maybe scale it down so we've got some draft. That's one thing that makes ZBrush really nice is if you're thinking of 3D printing in mind when you start sculpting, you can start preparing for things like printing and even mold making right in the software. They have tools that make that really easy for you. So I'll go here and smooth this out. Okay. You can always take a look at your geometry by hitting Shift F or hit the polyframe tool over here. When you're using Dynamesh, it doesn't much matter what your geometry looks like, so you can just leave that tool alone. But if you're producing something that you want to print but also move to an animation or game design pipeline, you can always retopologize your characters to make them low polygonal characters with a surface mesh that you can apply to it. So you have your high detail for viewing the animation, but a low resolution character that makes animation smoother or is more optimized for your game animation platform. All right, so I'll just play around a little bit more here, maybe add some eyes to this character. I'm going to invert this mask, and if I hit the inflate tool, this is like I'm putting a compressed air hose in the surface, and I'm just inflating this here. I can smooth it back down again, inflate once again, so I get this nice bulbous form that mirrors that masked area. And then if I Dynamesh once again, I can then go ahead and smooth this out, and I get this nice kind of eyeball form, and I'm on my way to making a nice lizard character. All right, so those are some of the basic tools that I use. Dynamesh is a lifesaver, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to hop back to showing you what I've made here and talk to you a little bit about some of the tools that are in ZBrush to make 3D printing possible. So when thinking about printing a figure, what you want to consider is not only how to set up this model in print or the scale of the figure, but also how you'll assemble this. If you've ever built a model kit, you'll know that toys truly are not made in one piece as you see them on the store shelves. While they may come assembled to you, they're actually made in many pieces, in some cases upwards of 100 pieces, so that you can mold these characters or the toy that you're making much more easily. And you can also have separate parts and pieces to be assembled after the fact. And having separate parts also makes not only the manufacturing process easier, but also the painting process. If you take a look at Orville here, while he's a simple character, he has multiple colors going on. And if I wanted to paint this, I'd want to break him up into the parts and pieces that have unique colors so that when I paint it, I'm not having to mask and carefully outline certain areas, but instead I can just paint all of the blue pieces because they've already been separated out. So when I'm modeling, instead of just pulling everything from one sphere, like one piece of clay like I'd done earlier, what I do is I model in different subtools or layers. If you are familiar with like Photoshop or something like that, subtools are individual objects. So if you see here, if I hit solo and go through, you can see that all of my parts are actually different subtools on the screen. So here's his little tail feather. And what you see is I actually made this key. I pulled out a little peg from the tail there so that I can slot that in to his rump. So if you see here, I've got all of these different pieces. And one of the really cool tools that they've added to ZBrush in the past few years is this live Boolean feature. A Boolean operation, for those who don't know, some say Boolean, but a Boolean is a mathematical function where you take one shape and either subtract, add, or find the intersection between those two shapes. If you're familiar with data sets, a Boolean operation is when you compare two data tables and find the commonality in the middle. So what the Boolean operation allows you to do is to take something like, let's say, his little butt here, the little rump layer I have, I've got the tail feathers here, and I want to subtract these tail feathers out so that when I go to print this thing, I have a little hole to plug that in. So you see with the live Boolean, if I turn that on, I've put my tail feathers into subtraction mode. And then when I turn on my live Boolean tool, it's subtracting that tail out of there. Also, it's subtracting the legs. If I choose, I can subtract those legs out of here. So I move the legs down underneath the rump, and then you'll see those legs subtract out. One thing to keep in mind if you're familiar with this process is whenever you print something, you have to account for a little bit of offset because there may be some swelling that occurs in your post-processing. Or if you're painting something, every time you add paint, you're adding a layer to the exterior surface and making your object just a little bit bigger. So what I'm doing here is I make a copy of the legs that I'm going to be subtracting out and I inflate them. It's a great tool down in the deformation palette in ZBrush. I've docked it here in the bottom right corner of my screen. If I go to inflate and I put in, actually inflate it in a negative value, so it flipped this thing inside out. If I click on inflate and inflate by a value of just 1 or 2, what I get is this nice offset. So it inflates the entire surface. Again, like I put an air hose in it and it's just gotten a little bigger. And that offset allows for those parts to pop in really easily, gives them enough clearance so that those parts don't collide with one another. It also gives me just enough room for paint and glue so that I can glue these parts together once they're post-processed. So I would highly recommend inflating all of your parts when you go to difference them out. And once you hit that Boolean difference command, you'll get a copy of this mesh with these holes taken into account. And then when you print them, they should fit together really nicely. So I'm going to, through the magic of preparedness, I'm going to go over to my fully prepared model here of Orville and show you. So this is Orville with all of the parts union together that I want to be part of one shape. I've elected to not separate out some of the parts that are just very small, like the tip of his beak. I can carefully go in there and paint it that nice chestnut color later on. The pupils, I've actually made an indentation in his eyes so that when I'm going to paint the whites of his eyes, I can paint that whole area white with an airbrush really quickly and then flood the interior with black because it's a lower area, so I can put a little black paint in there and it will pool in the eyeball and keep the pupil nice and crisp. I've done the same with his eyebrows. I've kind of inset a little channel there so that I can put a little watered down paint in there. It'll flow into that channel and then set up, leaving a nice area for that paint. If you're familiar with model kits like Gundam kits made by Bandai, you can use like a Sharpie marker, flood those little recessed areas and then wipe off the excess, and it will leave in its place a little what they call panel line so that the paint or the ink clings to those recessed areas, and it's a great technique that you can do in ZBrush as well. Just by using that damn standard brush or by masking and pushing an area in, you can create nice areas for paint. Another consideration to make when you're sculpting. So if we take a look here, I've got all the parts and pieces and it looks pretty much like the character I had before. And I'll use this really cool command in the tool menu called expose. Let's see here. If I go to tools or transform, I can hit expose. And now all of the pieces are in a grid. So it's separated everything out. So if I want to make a quick blueprint of my character to see what all the pieces are and how they're assembled, I can very easily do this here. When I make toys for clients, I often ship them in pieces so that the parts don't get broken during shipment. It also gives them kind of a nice puzzle to put together, and I often use this expose command to make a sheet of parts so they know how to assemble the character once they receive it. So that can be really handy as well. So effectively, I've got all the parts here. You see that all of these parts are separated. They've all got keys and different considerations. One thing, when I'm talking about a key, if you see this belt line here, I've made this tapered box here, which is a registration mark. A key is a term that comes from mold making. You have a key of a certain shape that is a male form, and then you've got the other side of the mold that has the inverse female form, and so that allows you to register those objects to make sure that the two halves of your mold are not rotated. If you want to make molds in ZBrush, you can do so very easily using that live Boolean tool, but I use this key idea to make sure that all of my parts are registered properly. So you can see the positive key there, and then when you look at the legs, I've got the key subtracted out, and then if you look at the underside of the shirt, I also have that key right there. So when these parts come together, they will fit really nicely, and it gives me just enough area for glue as well so that I get a nice secure contact between those different pieces. All right, so I'll go ahead to that transform menu once again, hit expose, everything will magically go back together the way I had it before. All right, so I've already printed out Orville. If you take a look at my camera here, I can show you a little makeup tutorial. Hopefully that's in focus for you here. This is the little Orville print that I've done. And while he stands, he's a little bit back heavy due to the little tail that he has. And so what I want to do is make a base for Orville so that he has a way to stand up. And so what I'm going to do here is bring in a cylinder and make sure that it is scaled to size. One thing that people often get confused by in ZBrush is they'll sculpt their thing, they'll export it, and then they'll find it's either really small or really large, and they don't know why. And the reason is, as opposed to different pieces of CAD software that have a defined unit of measure, ZBrush doesn't have a scale from the outset. It's virtuous because it allows you to have things like Dynamesh that allow you to have infinite geometry, but it can also be confusing when you're preparing for print because you don't know what size certain things are. What I'd like to do is to import a piece of geometry that has a fixed scale. I may not know when I'm starting to sculpt something how tall I want this thing to be or what diameter I want every peg to be, but I might know the overall scale. I might have a pedestal that I'm looking to print for. I may have an overall height that I'm trying to hit for packaging. So what I do is I bring in some sort of reference tool that has a fixed scale, and I scale the world to that object. And then I know that everything that is related in size will be about the right scale when it's all said and done. I don't know exactly how tall the head of a character is, but I may know that it's 7 inches in height for the full character to be a 1/12 scale figure. Like this here, you see this beautiful Superman and Bizarro sculpt by Brody Perkins. Hey, Brody. Brody is a great artist working out of Hawaii, and he sculpts for DC Comics. But when character artists like that sculpt for someone like DC Comics or DC Collectibles, they don't know the scale of the head. They just know how tall the figure needs to be. So what I'll show you here is I want this character to be in scale with the amiibo figures that Nintendo already makes, so that if anyone has these figures, the toy that they print out will be in scale with what they've already got. So what I've done is I've taken a pair of calipers and measured the circular base here, and I know that it's exactly 50 millimeters in diameter. So I'm going to show you what I'll do. So I've made a version of this little base here. I'm going to enable that. So you see I've got a little base, and I know that's 50 millimeters wide. So what I'll do is I'll select this base tool. It's the subtool currently selected. And you can tell that because in the upper right-hand corner, it's the largest icon here. And what I'll do is go to the Z plugin, which is full of all kinds of great utilities in ZBrush. Definitely explore the Z plugin menu. And I'm going to click this little button here to dock this on the right side of my screen. It'll be on your left here. And with the Z plugin menu, there's a great one called 3D Print Hub. Now, Formlabs, a number of years ago, contributed to this. I've given some suggestions to Pixologic as well for what should be in here. This 3D Print Hub is your friend if you're going to be working with ZBrush and want to export to 3D print. What it enables you to do is to determine the scale of a single object and then have everything else in the scene scale to that reference object before you export it. So what I'll do here is I've got my base selected. I'm going to click Update Size Ratios right here, and it's going to give you some options. It's going to say, I lost my audio there for a minute. Hopefully you all can still hear me. So what this menu does here is it gives you a guess of what the scale of your object is. I'm going to select millimeters. It's what I like to work in and what the 3D print preparation software PreForm works in. So I've got my object in millimeters. You'll see that it's pretty close here. It sees that in the X dimension and the Z dimension that it's 49.9 millimeters. I'm just going to bump that up to 50. And now I know that that is exactly 50 millimeters. And now that I've got that determined, what I can do here is go to Export to STL or OBJ to export all of the visible tools in either STL or OBJ format, which PreForm and other 3D printing softwares accept. Or I can go Send to PreForm, and this will export these models directly to the PreForm software. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. It's cycling through all of the tools that I have, and hopefully it only is exporting the visible tools. So I'm going to let it do its thing. And it's scaling everything to that reference scale, which is that base. So I'm going to give it a minute here. It's going to open up PreForm on my other screen, and then I can take a look at PreForm with you all and show you how I get things set up for print. While I'm doing that, I'm just going to check the chat over here. All right, we've got some great questions here, so bear with me. So in the chat here, someone asked, is ZBrush free? It's a great question. So ZBrush is by far, I think, one of the most reasonably priced pieces of software out there in that I've owned ZBrush for 10 years and I've never paid for an upgrade. They update ZBrush about twice a year with major improvements, and I paid that initial price to purchase ZBrush, about $900 back in 2010, and I've gotten a free upgrade every year since. Now that said, that may be a barrier to entry for you because it is an expensive tool, but it's a one-time price. That said, last summer at the ZBrush Summit, they announced that they have released a really generous free trial that you can get on their website. So just go to the Pixologic website for that. And then additionally, they have monthly pricing where you can do a ZBrush subscription. You get the latest version of ZBrush, but you pay a much smaller monthly price. And then if you choose to buy ZBrush, if you get a job or maybe at work, they decide they want you to start using ZBrush, you can upgrade to a full version with discounted pricing as a monthly member. So keep that in mind. All right, so what I'll do here is pull PreForm over to my screen so we can take a look at the export result. Right now, PreForm is still importing those files, so I'll take a moment to look at another question over here. So Cassie asked in the chat, do you sculpt a full character first and then split it into parts, or do you model with the parts in mind in the beginning? So it depends on what I'm making. In the case of this character, I knew that I wanted color separation, that these really tight lines that are existent in the character, I want those to be nice and sharp. And as a result, I don't want to be masking these areas because I know that I'll mess up and be frustrated in my paint application. So I modeled all of these parts individually from the beginning. If I switch over here, I can show you the ZBrush character that I'm currently working on. This is Marvel's Daredevil. He is a personal favorite of mine. Now, when sculpting human anatomy, you often want to sculpt in a neutral pose and then pose the character after the fact. So I'm just going to sculpt Daredevil almost all as one piece, with the exception of areas of color separation or different articles of clothing. So his gloves and his shorts and his boots, those are all separate pieces. But ostensibly, this character is one piece. I'm going to pose it and then cut it into pieces later for print preparation. Because I may want to change the pose, and if I put all of the work into engineering my character and then change the pose, all of that engineering work has to be discarded and redone regardless. So it depends on what it is you're doing. Great question. Good to Grow asks in the chat, can you import a drawing to work over? Yes, absolutely. With the Spotlight tool that I've used for reference images here, you can import reference images. So if I turn on my Spotlight tool, I can drag one of these drawings over, and I can actually change the opacity so that I get a ghost image and do an overlay. So I often am working like this, or if I want to check proportions with a character, I'll do just that. I'm going to go ahead and put that back and increase the opacity so you can see our good friend Orville there. Okay. All right, one more question, and then we'll take a look at PreForm. Good to Grow mentions at Hasbro, the sculpting department has a haptic device for sculpting. Yeah, so that is a pen tool that works with a piece of software called PreForm. PreForm isn't as popular as it used to be, but that is a modeling software similar to ZBrush that uses a haptic pen device. So instead of a touchscreen display with a pen like a Wacom tablet, it is instead an arm that has motors to resist movement. So if you're drawing on the surface of a sphere, when you push the pen to where the sphere would be, it will stop your movement wherever that surface is in the software. So it gives you this really nice sense of being able to sculpt in 3 dimensions in the real world, but it takes a lot of learning to figure out how to work in that kind of virtual space, because you're really just drawing with a pen in the air. I think in virtual reality, a tool like that these days would be really helpful because you can actually walk around the object. And I think there may be a time where haptic input devices become more popular with digital sculpting, but as it stands right now, I personally sculpt with a mouse because I like to do things the hard way. But if you have a pen input device, it's really easy to just sculpt on your screen. And ZBrush makes it really easy because the mouse cursor clings to the surface of your object, so you know exactly where you're sculpting all the time. Okay. Bear with me here. Let's get PreForm pulled up, and then we'll take a look at all these little parts and pieces. Feel free to keep the questions coming. We've got a new member in the chat, MoonClan Keegan, and Keegan asked about ZBrush Core. So I should have mentioned that. ZBrush Core is a great version of ZBrush for new users that has a limited set of tools, but it has all of the tools that I've talked about today. So the live Boolean is available, the Dynamesh feature is available, the 3D Print Hub is available. So if you want to get started with a full version of ZBrush, but don't want to spring for all of the tools available in the professional version, ZBrush Core is a great tool for you. And yes, there is a promotional pricing offer for anyone who is upgrading from ZBrush Core to the full version of ZBrush. Just go to pixologic.com for that, and they'll give you all the details. All right. So I'm going to pull over PreForm. Now, PreForm is the Formlabs software that comes along with your Formlabs printer. In my case, I've got a Form 3 at home, and I instruct customers on the use of the Form 3 every day as part of our live training sessions. And what I'll do here today is show you how PreForm works and how you can import your models in order to get them set up for print. So once again, I've gone to the 3D Print Hub in ZBrush. I've defined the scale of that little base that I made, and then I exported everything directly into PreForm. It analyzed those small objects and decided what scale they would be. It referenced that small base, and then it brought everything in my scene. In order to get started, what I need to do is go to this job setup screen and select the printer I'm going to be using. Now, Formlabs has this great naming convention for its printers. Instead of a serial name, an alphanumeric chain that's hard to remember, they give you an adjective animal name for your printer. So my printer is Colossal Wrasse, and it will show you if the printer's online. So Colossal RAS is in another room in my printing area, which I'll show you in the next live stream. And what I can see from here is which cartridge of resin is inserted and which tank. Now I've elected to use the new Tough 1500 resin. It's my favorite material right now because Tough 1500 captures high detail, but it performs like a polypropylene plastic, which is pretty popular in figures. The character here is a vinyl, but vinyl is very similar in mechanical properties to a polypropylene. So I'm going to print in that Tough 1500 material. It gives a really nice rigid surface. So if you play with this character, if you drop it, if you give it to kids, it's going to withstand some tough love, but also it gives you a really smooth surface to paint on. So Tough 1500 is what I'm electing to use here. So what I need to do is in the material menu, I need to come here and change my material to that Tough 1500. And then the version is version 1. It's the only version that exists because this material is just about 2 months old now. So I'm going to select V1 there. Then what I need to do is select the layer thickness. The layer thickness is the physical thickness of each and every printed layer. If you print it with a traditional 3D printer or an FDM printer, you'll know that the thickness is determined by the actual diameter of the material that you're printing, the plastic wire that is being melted. In our case, with an SLA printer or a low force stereolithography printer with the Form 3, the layer thickness is not determined by a spool of wire because we're printing in a liquid. Instead, it's the actual thickness of that liquid layer trapped between the printing surface and the tank bottom. It's a little meniscus that forms with that liquid resin, and that liquid is going to get flash cured into a solid plastic when the 4 or 5 nanometer light hits the resin. So wherever that laser light is, that liquid is going to turn into a solid. So what I'm doing here is determining the thickness of the layer, which will 1, determine how quickly that will print, and 2, it will also determine how detailed that surface is going to be, or rather how smooth. The thicker the layers are, as you can imagine, you may get a little bit of a stair step between layers, although the Form 3 does an excellent job of blending those layers together, even at the lowest layer thickness at 100 microns. But I choose to go to 50, which gives me a nice compromise between surface detail and speed. So 50 microns is what I like to do for toy designs like this. Okay, so PreForm right now has a bunch of pieces on it because I think I exported things incorrectly. So every tool that I have in the software got exported. Yeah, so what I'm going to do here real quick is I'm going to go through and using the model list on the left side of the screen, I'm going to delete some of these items. So I'm going to go ahead and select some tools here and just go ahead and delete them. Or rather, I can select the tools that I know I want to keep, which is the head here. I'm holding the Shift key to select multiple objects. I've got the tail. I've got my shirt. I think I see the little legs here. I'll keep those. I'll keep my little base down here. Okay, so those I will just hide, and then anything that is shown should be something I can get rid of. I've also got an export of the full character. Let's see where that fella is on the list. I'll hide him. Just doing a little live troubleshooting here. Okay, and I'll save the little legs. Okay, so anything that is still checked, just go through and hit the delete key, get those out of there. Feel free to keep questions coming in the chat. Happy to answer any questions you may have. One of the great aspects of this model list here is that you can either quickly delete things like I'm doing now, or you can just hide things. So if there's a part of your print that you don't know you want to print right now, maybe you have a design revision to do and you realize at the last minute, you can just hide these objects, and when they're hidden, they're not going to send to the printer. Okay, so I've got all my pieces. I'm back in action here. So I will show you how to set things up in PreForm. So starting right off the bat, if you export all of your tools all at once, you're like, you know what, I just want this to be a figurine. I'm happy carefully painting this like I would with like a Warhammer figure. I'm really, careful with my paintbrush. I know my friend Corey is in the chat. Corey is an amazing painter and is able to paint things with multiple different colors without mixing his paint, but I'm personally pretty heavy-handed when it comes to that, so I prefer to separate my parts, but you can print something as a single object. It's not an issue. One drawback, though, is what you need to do in PreForm is to consider that the printing surface as part of an inverted SLA printer is effectively the ceiling. Everything we're printing sticks to the ceiling, and so we need to find a way to keep it up there to defy gravity. So in an effort to do that, the PreForm software has support scaffolding. Those supports are generated automatically by PreForm to have a way to have your object build in midair without it falling and thus defy gravity. So what you want to do here is find an orientation for this character where we can eliminate as many of those supports as possible. So what I like to do is print on a 35 to 45 degree angle. So I'm just using this globe tool or this gumball editor in the middle to rotate the object to kind of tip it back by 45 degrees. This allows me to put supports on the backside of the character instead of right on the face, so I can go to those smooth, less important areas on the back and sand those very easily after the fact. And you can see this character that's on my screen right now is the figurine that I have here in my workspace. I just printed him last night. So I tipped him right on his back. Then I can go over here to the support menu and I can click Auto Generate Selected. And that will have an algorithm run, look at all of the areas that are not supported that are kind of printing in midair, and it will put a support touch point wherever there is an overhanging surface and then generate the scaffolding as a result. But what I want to do here, I'll show you how to optimize this for the Form 3. I can change the touch point size and take it down to 0.35 millimeters. And if my object is small like this one, I can push it down to 0.25 millimeters, very, very small touch points, okay? So I'll do that. I'll change the touch point size. And what that allows you to do is have these low force touch points that peel away like Velcro. So when I'm done printing and I wash my part, I can grab that part and rip it off like Velcro. You see very little indication of the print process and just do a little light sanding on the surface. Again, I'll address this in my stream coming up in a couple of weeks, but let's go ahead and click Auto Generate Selected. And what you see at the top of the screen, this Generating Supports dialog is there. What's happening in the background is this beautiful algorithm is running, looking at all of the areas that need support, and it's placing a support touch point in the background. And what you'll see here in just a minute is those supports are going to flash on the screen and they will be ready to print. So let's let that run, and I'm going to take a look at the chat here. Okay. So I will go back and take a look at ZBrush here in a minute to show you how I go about posing a character. There's questions about posing that Daredevil figure, so I'll show you how that works out. All right. We've got a question about scale. So yes, if you import something into PreForm and you're like, you know what, judging on the scale of the platform, this object is too small or too big, you can absolutely scale. Once the supports are generated for Orville here, I'll show you how I would do a scale test and then make a determination on the final scale of the character using PreForm. Okay. And we're almost there. All right, here are our supports. I'm going to go ahead and hide all of the other pieces of my character. So we just take a look at Orville here. All right, so what you'll see here is that supports have been added to every one of those overhanging surfaces. And this nice base raft is added. It even put the name of my file on the base to keep my parts separated so I know what's what. And we've now got supports everywhere that they need to be in order to support this figure. And imagine, again, this is hanging upside down while printing. So these supports are keeping everything in place. And if we slice through these layers here, we're going to get an indication of what's going to happen each and every printed layer. So what you see here in orange, anything in orange is our support scaffolding, and anything in blue is your model. And so you can see how these little supports grow to meet the surface of the object as it prints in midair. They're really kind of a miraculous development in 3D printing, these support scaffolds, and I commend the Formlabs software team for making these supports more and more efficient with every release. If you have PreForm, if you have a printer, please keep your PreForm software up to date. You're going to get the benefits of these tools I'm talking about, and you're going to get the best performance for each resin that you have. So if you want the printer to work a little better, check and see if there's an update, or get in touch with our lovely support team at support.formlabs.com. All right, so I go through, I slice through my character. I think all the supports look good. If I look at the right side of my screen, the printability menu is showing a thumbs up, indicating that you're good to go. Everything that needs to be supported is supported. There are no areas that are under supported. What I can do here is kind of make a scenario where we may have some trouble in printing. So I'm going to delete some of these supports and click apply. And that algorithm is going to run once again. It's going to say, hey, it looks like some areas of this model may not be supported, and that can cause an issue. So if you see here, the underside of the beak has no support, and as this is printing, it's hanging out in midair. It's a cantilever, an overhang. So what I want to do is turn on this minima indicator here. You see it says unsupported minima detected. Regions outlined in red are unsupported and will not adhere to the print. Manually add more support. So if I turn this on, show minima, you'll see the tip of this beak here, printing in midair, nothing holding it up there. So if I were to print this, that beak would just be missing, and every layer that attaches to this spot would also be missing subsequently. So if I go here to edit supports, all my supports are going to go away, and my cursor will turn into a little half sphere, and that's representative of the support touch point where it interacts with the surface. So if I click on these red areas, a support will be added. The algorithm is going to kind of recalculate here. You'll see printability is thinking. I've got that green thumbs up again, so it sees that I've achieved printability once more by adding those supplemental supports, and now we are good to go once again. Okay. So let's say I printed this object and it's too small. That's actually the case with the Orville print that I've done. Orville came out just a little bit too small. I was scaling him by his overall height, but I wasn't taking into account that he's got these little wisps of hair or feathers as they may be, and the hair was contributing to his height, but I want the top of his head to go to the scale that I want. So I need to scale him up by about 20%. In order to do so, I come up here to the left side of the screen where there's a size menu, and you see that there's a scale factor. A scale factor of 1.00 is 100% scale, or 1-to-1 scale ratio. What I want is to increase by 20%, and so what I'll do here is go to scale, and I'll do 1 plus an additional 20%, which would be 0.2. So 1.20 is 120% scale from my original model size. If I hit enter there, my character is now scaled. And if I want to, while I'm at it, I could make a clone of this character and do different scales here. You'll see the auto detection of minima has jumped in here because all of my supports went away when I scaled. If I come here to my layout, I'm going to create 2 duplicates. And I'm going to make a character that has a scale that is 30% bigger, just to see what that feels like. And then additionally, I'm going to scale this character up by a factor of 2, twice as big. So if I do that, I'm going to get this jumbo Orville here. So now I've got 3 iterations of the character, and I can go ahead and generate supports for them. And then I can really get a good sense of what my scale is going to be like, and then go back and print all of my little parts and pieces to make my little model kit so that I can paint things here in a couple of weeks. So that is a quick rundown of PreForm. If you have any questions about PreForm, happy to answer those in the chat. I'm going to take a quick look here to see if anyone is asking questions, and then if not, we'll take a minute, go back to ZBrush. I'll do a quick posing tutorial, show you some online resources, and leave you with some time for questions. Okay. All right, doesn't look like there are any questions in the Twitch chat, so I'm going to go back over to ZBrush and show you how to pose things real quick. Oh, you know what? I might want to show you one more tool here just to show you how that live Boolean tool works live here on the screen. So the character base here is smooth, and I noticed with the amiibo characters, these little statues, that their base represents the environment that they're typically found in. And Orville is always stuck behind the desk at work in the regional airport, and they have a really gross linoleum floor tile set up in there. So I want to have that represented in the statue here instead of this kind of nice grassy knoll he's standing on. So what I'm going to do here is I've modeled this grout pattern using the ZModeler brush, which is a hard-sided geometry tool in ZBrush. I'll get into that in a later stream, but this grout pattern has been developed here, but I want this to be a recessed area or indented in the surface so that I can flood this with paint and easily paint those little lines instead of needing to mask off a grid. So what I'll do here is I've made the grout and I'll put it into subtraction mode here. You can see the little Boolean operations here. There's either combine, which is showing 2 circles that are overlapping, subtract, which shows one circle being subtracted from another, or overlap, which is your good old Venn diagram showing the intersection between those two circles. So if I go here to subtract, what I know is that the object on the top is my base, and the object below it is the grout, which is subtracting. So the number at the top is being subtracted by the number at the bottom, and then the result is this here. So you can see if I turn LibBoolean off, I have my positive shape, but if I turn it on, then wherever I move this grout, it's going to subtract it. So if I move this around, I get a beautiful live preview of that Boolean operation, which is kind of unparalleled in any other piece of software. I'm not sure how it works or why it works so efficiently without my computer lighting on fire, but it's an amazing virtue of the ZBrush software. So if I wanted that grout not to be as deep, or if I just wanted it to be a partial pattern, just a nice indication, I can move this up. And now I'm getting a different grout pattern. If I wanted to have it offset, I could just move it over. In any case, the LibBoolean tool is really amazing. Highly recommend you play around with that. But I need to show you how to pose. So let's go over to my Daredevil character here. I'm going to zoom out. Now I've got the body of the character here. I'm going to do a quick Boolean operation just to weld all of these pieces together. So a Boolean union operation is happening right now to glue all my parts and pieces together, and then I'll have a nice mannequin I can pose for everybody. While we're here, I will also import my spotlight view for all of my Daredevil reference so I know what kind of pose I'm going for. Again, any questions you may have, feel free to throw them in the chat. So I've got a new question. Is it best to optimize model surface finish in ZBrush, or is there another piece of software? There are all kinds of geometry resurfacing tools out there, but ZBrush is amazing at that. One thing you can do, I talked about the Dynamesh feature before. Dynamesh has an option to polish. And so when you read Dynamesh, I always have polish turned on. You can see it in the upper right-hand corner. Polish is just going to smooth over the global surface of that model to effectively, like if you had a clay model and you dipped it in water and smoothed it over with your hands, that's what it's doing. So whenever I'm modeling, like the face I was modeling on Daredevil, humans have a tendency to kind of over-detail things, and it doesn't look natural. Everything looks lumpy. So I just keep polish turned on. But there is a tool called ZRemesher or ZModeler. Those tools can help you redefine the surface very easily without losing any detail. You can also make a smooth, lower detail version of your model and then project high detail onto it, so you get the benefit of those fine features with the optimization of a smooth surface. So I recommend you check those out as well. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make a Boolean mesh here once again. I've got all these parts separated out to make for a smaller file. I'm going to go ahead and remesh here. We had a late start today, so I'll go over about 10 minutes or so that we have time for more questions, and also leave you with some resources so you can learn ZBrush on your own time. And who knows, maybe we'll reconvene for another one of these sessions in the weeks to come. All right, so it looks like I'm going to have some difficulty here. I'm just going to kind of show the body. I'll leave the head where it's at. Grab my mannequin here, and I'm going to go to my texture menu and load the spotlight. I'm going to come over here to my reference folder and grab this Daredevil spotlight. So here's my reference. I am sculpting Daredevil in the image of Paulo Rivera. Paulo is a wonderful artist who works at Marvel, one of my favorites. And I love this cover here with Daredevil and Spider-Man hanging out, another one of my favorites. I'm a Marvel zombie from way back, so love Spider-Man and Daredevil teaming up. So I want this pose of Daredevil kind of doing this casual Captain Morgan stance on a fire escape. So what I want to do is to use that masking tool that I showed you before. So what I can do is grab this mask lasso tool, and I can encircle this area just above the knee because I know I want the character to bend there. And actually, when you bend a knee, it does not follow the calf muscle, but rather stays in line with the thigh muscles. So I've got one leg masked off here. I want to make sure to get the entire muscle. And then I can blur this a little bit. So as I move, everything kind of blends together. And you know what? Instead of just bending the leg first, I am going to go ahead and rotate the entire leg as one piece. Okay. So now I've got that inverted mask. I'm going to come here and find that my rotation point, I want that to be aligned with the hip. And then I'm going to also rotate kind of on an angle. So now when I grab this rotation line, this longitude line, very similar to what we have in PreForm, I'm going to rotate this leg. You'll see there's some deformation based on how I selected, but there's always going to be some resculpting involved in posing. So I've grabbed the leg, I've rotated it. Now I will come here to the knee and mask it off along with the tendons on the backside of the knee. I'm going to move my rotation down here to the kneecap area where the joint is. I'm going to rotate the leg, and I'm going to now mask off that area and do a nice conditional rotate here. Okay, and then finally we'll do a little ankle rotation. Move this down here, rotate a little bit, and then also he's got to find his footing on the flat surface, so we'll do that. And also we're going to tip this foot out because humans never really stand with their feet straight forward unless they're in a military academy. Okay, done that. I'm going to give a more natural stance to this foot here. Go ahead and rotate this foot out, unbreak his ankle. Okay, and then let's really quickly, I'm going to turn on the mirror function and rotate these arms downward. Okay. Rotate these arms down, move them down just a little bit, and there we go. Real quick pose, well on my way to posing the character. I could also grab individual fingers and start posing the hands, and then I would have my character posed and ready to go. At this point, I would chop this up into pieces, add in those keys and all those considerations for 3D print. But that's about all I have for you in regards to ZBrush. I'm going to take a look at the chat here for a minute. All right, so one question that is in the chat that I would love to address is, where do I go to learn ZBrush? Well, Pixologic, as I've said, is a very generous company. They have so many wonderful professional free resources for learning. Our live streams are modeled after what Pixologic has done because they have a really amazing team over there on the media side of things. So you can go to pixologic.com, go to Learn ZBrush in the top menu navigation in the top right corner there. There's 2 training resources. One is called ZBrush Training. On Z Classroom here, there are articles and videos, specifically videos, teaching you how to use each and every tool in the software. And if you sign in to this, which is a free account, you can make a playlist of all of the support content that you would like to watch, and it will just auto play through all of those, give you a check mark when you're done viewing something. You can always go back and review old content. So highly recommend you take a look here. There are tutorials for both ZBrush, which have been going on for almost 20 years at this point, and ZBrush Core as well. ZBrush Core, again, is that less expensive version to get you started. Highly recommend you start out with ZBrush Core and upgrade from there. One of the other really wonderful things about Pixologic is they like to showcase artists in their community. And so you get a different voice in each of these tutorials. So you see people with wildly different styles and backgrounds, different levels of experience. So you have intro users of ZBrush instructing you on how to use ZBrush from an insider's perspective as an introductory user. So highly recommend you explore the Z Classroom here. Also, on a daily basis, Pixologic has their ZBrush live stream going on YouTube and Twitch. So if you go to ZBrush Live, you can see here we've got a calendar. They're going through their Master Series right now, which are some of the best artists in the industry. Gio Nakpil works over at Facebook. He's an amazing anatomical sculptor. Marcel sculpts for Sideshow Collectibles and other collectibles companies. And Vichar, who's going to go live now, Vichar is an artist working out of India that is a really amazing sculptor. So All of these live streams are free. They're happening on a daily basis, so I highly recommend you check out their schedule, and all of their videos
Hello, ZBrush
are
friends.
recorded,
I see a couple of people
so you can go
chiming in here in
through
the chat.
and look
Everybody's
at
excited.
previous
Welcome
series.
to
And what I
another
liked about these live streams is not only do they give you a long time to spend time with these artists to see their process in real time, but each artist tends to stick to a project and complete it from beginning to end. So if you want to see how to sculpt a Hulk from beginning to end, check out Mike Thompson's Hulk series. It's amazing, and he's going to be printing out that with our large format printer here soon. Last thing I'll show you here is that we have some live streams going on like the one you've just watched. Thank you again for joining me here this afternoon. If you go over to formlabs.com/formlabs sessions, you'll see the Formlabs Comes to You series. And coming up on April 30th, in just 2 days here, we're going to have a lunchtime conversation with two great artists and members of our Formlabs community, Emin Akhtar and also Daniel De Leon. They're going to talk about 3D printing and how they use 3D printing with ZBrush as part of our community ambassador program. Eamon is really wonderful because he made an entire series of toys that he prototyped beginning to end on the Formlabs printers, which saved him thousands of dollars in manufacturing costs. So highly recommend you tune in for that. And they can also address some tools that they're using with 3D printing to make COVID response a little bit safer for those in California, as members of the medical and emergency response communities are in desperate need of masks and ventilators. So they're helping out with that effort as well using the Formlabs printers. So highly recommend you take a look at that. And finally, it's just a plug for myself. You can always reach me at support.formlabs.com or reach out for a PSP training, and I'll give you that on the Formlabs side. If you want to work on a project with me, just come to my website here, stuffbyjk.com, and you can take a look at my portfolio and see some of the other projects I've worked on, whether through Formlabs or through other partners. So happy to talk to you there at stuffbyjk.com. I'll take one more minute to take a look at the questions. Otherwise, I will leave you with one last look at our Orville character here. So let's take a look here. Romeo asked a question, how do you keep a resin cartridge when you're not printing? It's a great question. Cartridges have an automatic resin handling system. If the cartridge is sitting in a printer that is not turned on or a printer that is not currently running, the cartridge will not dispense any resin. So you can leave the cartridge in the printer, no problem there at all. You can also take it right out of the printer, put it on a shelf. They stack like books on end, so the cartridges are really easy to handle. And Dan in our chat from Formlabs is just plugging the ZBrush live sessions and the Formlabs Comes to You sessions that are going to be coming up here in the week to follow. So please do check those out. And that's all we've got for today. So once again, my name's Jake Kapusta, Stuff by JK. Go ahead and take a look at my site if you want to reach out, or my Instagram. Happy to talk to you there if you have follow-up questions. And I'll just leave you with one last look at our buddy Orville. All right, Orville, thanks as always for your service, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.